Hi, welcome to the Lisa Saunders Show. I'm Lisa Saunders, and back by popular demand is Jeanne Valeri. Did I say it right?
You did, indeed.
Okay, I've been practicing. You're a book reviewer with Hartford Book Examiner, correct?
Yes.
Or columnist, because sometimes you're not always reviewing books, you're doing interviews.
That is true.
Q&A. Anyway, it's been fun to have you before.
Oh,
So
thank you for
I
having me
really
back.
wanted you to come back because I wanted you to interview my friend Jeanne E. Rogers, children's book author. And the reason I was so excited to have you come on is, first of all, you have a very unique topic. You're really into Australian endangered species.
Correct.
Right?
Yes.
And you write children's stories about that.
Yes.
And I love how you picked a unique place to keep your imagination, and you also teach about environment, so it's also you're learning something. But another reason I wanted you to have you come on is because you're very nice to other authors.
Thank you.
You were very kind. You reviewed a book of mine on Amazon. You just love to give advice to authors on how to share their work, how to get the word out there. Like even before the cameras rolled, you were telling me some things and giving me new tips on social media. So I do thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome. I know how it feels, so it's always good to help.
Well, thank you. I love to have John on because he does the hard work of asking insightful questions. Okay. Like I said, my questions are going to be more random, but he actually has some real questions thought out. So go ahead.
Oh, the pressure.
I know the
Oh, my.
pressure of coming up with a good question.
I say they don't have to be questions, they have to be good questions and thought-provoking. It's Monday, people. It's Monday.
Early.
But anyway, as Lisa mentioned, you write a series of Australian fantasy adventures for young readers, and they do feature the continent's most endangered animals. So I wanted to know, what first sparked your interest in Australia and their creatures, and also how do you hope that your books will bring attention to them?
Well, I think the first thing that I would have to say is I don't know any child that's not fascinated by a koala or a kangaroo. They're really unusual creatures, and I was no different. I loved them from the time I was small.
Now you have a stuffed animal. Can you show it to us?
My little friend, a kangaroo.
Does he have a name?
I'm going to go really strange, and this is just Luella.
Luella, okay.
And the little Joey. We didn't name the Joey yet.
Okay.
But he will have a name. We'll talk about that later.
Okay.
Yes, I wanted to learn more about them. So as I grew older, I was always fascinated by the Australian outback, its animals, and the continent itself. It was always a dream that one day I would get there. So I started writing little stories when I was a kid, but nothing serious. But it evolved.
Did you ever get there?
Yes, I did.
Oh, you did?
I finally did get there, yes.
And did you see kangaroos jumping across the road?
I fed kangaroos.
Oh.
So, it was the most exciting trip of my life. It truly was. It was wonderful. I actually wanted to go to research some of these animals. It's one thing to research them online, and learn about them online. It's another thing to actually see them in person. So I went to a lot of places where I knew I would be able to actually see the animals firsthand.
Well, I appreciate your blog. Now, when I went on Amazon to your site, it has your blog that you regularly update, and I was excited to see you talk about this fox, a fox from Chile.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily Australia. You're not always for at least adults for your adult blog or whatever.
No, it's not. Actually, what happened was the interest in Australia evolved once I learned how endangered some of the animals there in Australia are, and they're endangered mainly because of things that we've done. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that interest kind of bloomed. It flourished.
Well, your blog is, I highly recommend your blog. They just need to find your name on Amazon because you had the picture of the fox, you had the map, on your blog, where to find it. You had links to other people's sites for people who really want to know more. And you even linked to, I think, a young person's site who did research on on this fox, right?
Exactly. I found a YouTube video that was narrated by a youngster, and I thought it was so great that they were actually teaching something that was important. So kids teaching kids is a good thing. I mean, it's very interesting, and they get involved if you do that.
Well, that's what I like about your work. You're very all-inclusive, and you love to highlight everybody that's got something to say.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly.
So thank you. Go ahead.
You're on a roll.
Oh, I'm on a roll. Gosh, I should be.
No, I'm like, I'm just going to sit back.
You ask the next
was
insightful
wonderful.
question.
Well, I don't know about that. But I actually, to piggyback off of what you were saying, your books too, they have some sort of added elements that enhance the story,
Right.
glossary,
Right.
links. Can you talk a little bit about that and how you hope to both entertain and educate your readers, and how you sort of reach for a balance between the two?
Sure. The first thing to get a child's attention is you have to entertain them in some way. They want to be entertained. They want to have fun. So I thought, okay, so if they're having fun, maybe learning can be stuck in there secretly, slyly, somehow. So what I've done is I've introduced these very strange characters. I've anthropomorphized them, set them up on their feet, you know, put bows and arrows and shields and all kinds of nifty things in their hands and paws, and sent them out on this adventure. But I thought, well, if I'm going to introduce them to these very unusual creatures, they've got to know more about them. Two things that I decided I needed to do. I needed to create sketches because they are so weird. These kids will probably know, even if I do a really good description, which I think I have in the stories, I think the kids would really benefit from some kind of a sketch. So I hired an artist to do sketches intermittently in the books to bring these creatures to life. And then, on top of that, what I did was anything in the book that was out of the ordinary, that was either Australia, flora, fauna, even places, if it was different, I created a glossary tip for them. So the kids could actually go to the back of the book, they're in alphabetical order, and the information is there, and there's also a link, a web link, if they want to learn more about either that plant or that place or that animal.
Oh, teachers must love that.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
So you go to schools
Yes,
with
I
this
do.
program. What age range would you give this?
Well, I've seen 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders at this particular point in time. Recently, I had 400 in a gymnasium, and that was a lot of fun. The kids are absolutely wonderful. It's amazing how much they know. I was always amazed by how much they know, and their questions are so pertinent. It's just a lot of fun.
What
to
kind
do
of
this.
presentations do you do?
I have a PowerPoint slideshow, and what I do is I explain to them why Australia's animals are so different. This is geological.
Oh, that's
And
wonderful.
so I go back to the beginning, you know, Pangea, you know, the separation of the continents, how Australia drifted away. And just by the very fact that it became isolated down away from the rest of the continents, this is where the life forms, even the plants, were developed differently than every place else in the world.
And for you to do a talk, they just contact you?
They
They
just
go to your blog or
Yep.
your Facebook page? They just...
Yes, sometimes I see them. I go to a lot of events around the state too. So sometimes I'll run into a teacher at an event or a librarian, and I'll give them some information about me. I have a brochure that explains what my presentation is all about and what I focus on, and they'll call me, and that's how we get together.
Oh, great. Well, you
Yeah.
must be very entertaining.
It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun.
Go ahead.
Well, I just have to say too, as a reader of a more advanced age, I guess kids of all ages benefit from the glossary because I found it very beneficial in my reading of your book as well. But I did want to ask you a little bit about writing for a younger audience, because I think that some people who haven't, necessarily attempted to take for granted how difficult it is. They think it's, oh, you're writing for kids. That's got to be easier than writing for adults. And maybe you can chime in on this too, because you've written for kids and adults, readers of all ages. But what are the particular challenges for writing for a younger audience?
Well, you really do think about your vocabulary. You really do. And you also think about the fact that you have to have some very good dialogue, stuff that kids will kind of understand and get lost in. But I have to say that trying to reach that medium where a child will understand the words that I'm using within the story, I think I've reached it because I have had a lot of feedback from teachers who say that I have not spoken down to them, that I have included words that they thought were great, that were learning tools for the teachers themselves. So you do have to reach that kind of a balance. You have to make it entertaining, but you have to teach some as well. So it's
Now, you won awards for your books. Tell us about your awards.
Well, both books have won a children's book awards. Each one has won at least a half dozen awards.
Wow.
And I'm really, really excited about it. The first book that I wrote actually won an honorable mention with Writer's Digest, which was really big.
That's huge,
Really
yeah.
big for me. And then they went on to win Gold Digital Awards from Benjamin Franklin. They've won Reader's Favorite Awards. children's literature awards. So
congratulations!
I've been very blessed.
That's
It's been really
wonderful.
cool. It's been really neat. Yeah.
Say there are stickers all over the front.
I know,
That's
she's got
awesome.
good
Awesome.
stickers and medals. I was afraid for you to bang your medals around, but that's just really cool. Congratulations. So what else do you want to know?
You know what I want to know? Actually, in your introduction, you were talking a little bit about your early readers, and what I found really fascinating, and obviously this makes sense given the audience that you're writing for, but you have early readers that are adults and also early readers that are children. Like I think you had 2 10-year-olds
Right.
Who read this book in its initial
Right.
form. So I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about the feedback that you got from both groups, and then how you weave that back into the story when you're finalizing it.
Well, I think for any author, beta readers are like crucial. You have to have beta readers, and the more you have, the better you are. So I do have a lot, and I ask for different groups all the time.
Now, what do you mean by beta readers?
A beta reader is a reader that reads your manuscript well before it's published and gives you feedback on either the plot or a character, or maybe they'll see something that you didn't see. I mean, after reading it like a gazillion times, yourself, you don't notice some of the obvious stuff.
And it shouldn't always be somebody that loves you like your mother.
Don't do that.
Yeah. Aunt Mary won't tell you the truth. Right. It's no, you don't do that. I have to admit, none of my children, who are all good readers, my daughter has a degree in creative writing as well, have not read my manuscripts prior. It's just not worth it.
Right, so where do you find these unbiased readers?
On Facebook and LinkedIn. I have so many connections there, and I'll just reach out to 1 or 2 of them and say, would you mind, giving me a beta reader? And they will. It's important to have the children involved. I have a lot of children beta readers that are great. 1 or 2 that have done it for me before and will do it again. I had one child that the mother read nightly to him, and he was mentioned. His name was Dylan. And she read nightly, and one evening she was a little tired, and she says, Dylan, I'm going to skip tonight. He says, well, if you're going to skip, I'm going to read it myself. So that's a good beta reader. I mean, they're excited about what's happening, and they're involved. And he gave me such great feedback. He was absolutely wonderful.
That's
really
great.
important, really important.
I did that for Ride a Horse, Not an Elevator, my children's novel. I got a first grade class that was willing to be the guinea pig. And so if they were excited, I kept going on that plot, but if I could see they were starting to scratch themselves and stuff, then I was like, okay, I need to get rid of that. But anyway, okay.
I still love that title. I should have won an award just for the title.
Yeah.
So what else do you want to know?
Well, to again sort of piggyback on something that you said, I was going to ask you as well, because you're writing books for a child audience, but adults are involved in this too, parents, caregivers. So how do you sort of appeal to both? And what do you think the benefit is of reading this, sort of communally as opposed to individually?
Well, I don't really have a problem with the adults. I have adult readership. They come back. People who have read the first one came back to get the second one, and they're not all kids. It's amazing how many adults are really into YA literature today.
Yes. Young adult.
Young adult.
No initials on the show.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Young adult literature is really a big thing today. And seniors come back to me to make a comment and say, I love it because it's so easy to read. It's no pressure.
Right.
There's nothing outlandishly crazy that I have to get into. So I have a readership that's kind of crossing all of the ages, which is really cool. It's really nice.
It was very entertaining. Kept me turning pages.
Wow, great.
I said, what are you doing? Are we going out tonight? I said, no, I'm reading a book. I'll wait with you.
How many books do you read a month as a reviewer,
Oh my
interviewer?
gosh. It depends. I probably do about 8 a month, 8 to 10.
And these are all...
I don't review them all. I
Right.
review as many as I can, but I just like to read.
Okay, because that's a lot. That's a lot, because you have a full-time job. It's not
I
like
do.
you do this all day long.
I wish.
But you're writing your own book.
Slowly.
Slowly. I forget, what's your name of your book, or do you have a name
Oh, no,
yet?
there's no name. That's why you've forgotten it. Okay. It's a book with no name.
I guess then I don't feel bad for forgetting.
No. So can I ask you, too, it is a fantasy series. So can you talk a little bit about the fantasy elements and sort of how you give a fresh twist on some classic themes?
Well, someone recently mentioned to me that it was a fantasy based in reality, and I guess that's really the better way to put it, because there's not a tremendous amount of magic going on. There is some sorcery, and there is some natural elements that seem to be in control of certain creatures, but there's not a lot of it. I really want to stress the moral lessons that I embed slyly within the stories. So the reality is something has gone wrong, and these creatures have to go out and find a solution to that problem. And along the way, some magical stuff happens, but it's not that much. It's more focused on how they solve their problems, who they find to help them solve their problems, and the decisions that they make along the way. So it's kind of a mixture there.
Sure. And to ask you a little bit about that, the book is very relationship driven. And I wanted to ask you, two of the central characters are two brothers, Wayland and Moreland, who have a very complicated relationship. And I'm just wondering, what do you want to convey about real life relationships through your fiction?
I think the thing that I really relay the most in both books is that there's an important unit here. It's called the family unit. And you have to rely on them. You will rely on them whether you realize it or not. And the next thing I kind of bring home is the importance of friendship. But over and above that, I tried to show that with a diverse group, you can accomplish more. So you'll find enemies actually collaborating within the stories. And that, of course, brings home the lesson that, your enemy, can be your friend. You need to look at things differently. As people, we need to look at other people differently and understand, before we make a rash judgment, if we understand them better, we'll be able to do more together. And that's kind of embedded deeply within my books. I really want to bring that kind of a impression to young readers.
Sure, and something that I really liked was, we have this notion that family is something that we're born into, but it's also what we make, and I think that that's a very deep theme in your book.
Right, it is, especially in book 2. It comes out very clearly when the secondary character, which is a little quoll, which is an endangered creature, and the numbat, which is another endangered creature, come together, and he realizes how much she means to him. It takes a while for him to realize that, and she helps him work through his problems and actually accept the responsibilities that he's supposed to accept as he goes through life. Something that he couldn't seem to face. He had a tragic incident occur, and he couldn't face what he needed to do. She helped him recognize that he needed to step up. So it's kind of cool.
Sure. And your characters, too, I was going to ask you, and I think you spoke to this a little bit earlier, and you used a much fancier term, which I have already forgotten, but you humanize your animal characters.
Oh, the
anthropomorphize them.
You were closer than that.
And I think you need to explain what that is.
For me.
And for me, too.
We've anthropomorphized animals all the time. Disney is an expert at doing it. Wind in the Willows. You take a creature, any kind of creature, and you put them up on their feet as though they were people, and you give them human traits. They love, they hate, they cry. They do everything that humans would do. That's anthropomorphizing an animal. And what better way to introduce a kid to an animal but then anthropomorphizing him? I think Mickey Mouse is like the best example, kids love them.
Absolutely, and what I wanted to ask you about that, in addition to the definition, was that a conscious choice in the sense that, do you feel that sometimes young readers can relate more to characters who they don't necessarily see themselves in physically, or was that just sort of coincidental?
No, I really didn't think of it that way, to tell you the truth. My history of reading, I'm a voracious reader, and from the time I was very young, Wind in the Willows and Watership Down were two of my favorites, and I went from them to another author whose name is Brian Jacques, and he is an English author. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us. But he wrote a whole series of books where he anthropomorphized animals. They were called the Redwall series. And I was so fascinated. I do own every single one of the books that he wrote, and he inspired me. And the reason why I did what I did with my books is because I didn't want to emulate Brian Jacques, because Brian Jacques' books are what I would consider a level higher reader than mine. What I wanted to do was bring his idea of anthropomorphizing animals down just a level to the younger kids, because the younger kids just can't, they just could not stay with his It was too difficult for them to read. And then when I thought of that, I says, well, what animals would I do? And that's when the flash came to me. I said, of course, let me do Australian animals. Kids love them, and they need some attention by people because they are so endangered. Many of them are so endangered. And the Australian people are great because they're doing so much to try to save their really unusual, weird animals that they have. They really have some really weird animals over there. Two of the weirdest animals in the world live in Australia.
And what are the weirdest that you consider the weirdest animals? You won't hurt their feelings.
We won't hurt them. They're called monotremes, and a monotreme is a mammal that lays eggs, and there are only two in the world, and that's the platypus and the echidna, and they both live in Australia. They're just really cool creatures.
And they're still called mammals, even though
they're mammals. They're called, well, they're not really considered mammals, okay? Not in the sense that we know, because they don't nurse their young in the same way that a mammal does. They have what's called a milk patch underneath their belly, and the young suckles off of that patch or licks the milk off of that patch. So monotreme is a category all to itself, completely to itself. Mm-hmm. And there's only two of them.
And so you are just so in the know.
I have really studied all these creatures and what's happening in terms of endangerment, not just on Australia, but worldwide. It really fascinates me what we've done and what we're trying to do.
Where do you go for your research? Do you have a particular favorite place, or you just...
I go a lot to archive.org, which is an organization that puts up information about these animals. And I also go to the IUCN, which is the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. They are the benchmark for endangerment around the world, and they have a guideline. You're invulnerable, you're endangered, you're critically endangered, and that's based on the percentage of population decreased over a certain number of years. So, for instance, the African lion is vulnerable. There's the tiger quoll, which is one of the creatures in my book, is critically endangered. And the IUCN keeps tabs on all these animals and sets up these, tabs for these benchmarks for them and puts it up on their site. So I will always go to their site to see what they have to say about these creatures.
Are you worried about any animals in the U.S.? Are they on the list? Or?
The black-footed ferret in the Midwest, which is a prairie animal, is in trouble, and they're closely linked in their environment to other creatures so it's like what they call an umbrella species. If one gets endangered, another does. Another one here in the north, the northern continent, is the wolf. We have to be very careful what we do with the wolf, because the wolf is a very important species. It's I forget the word for it, but I'll think of it. But if you take that wolf out of the environment, you will have a cascade effect that will affect all animals in the environment, and not just the animals, the environment itself will be affected.
Can you give us an example?
There's a great video on what happens when the wolf is removed. It actually changes rivers. It affects beavers. It affects elk. Mm-hmm. If they don't graze in certain areas, it's going to affect the plant life in that area. It's really a pyramid, like a domino effect, and people don't realize.
So you never would have written Little Red Riding Hood then, because that makes the wolf look bad.
Well, we have demonized the wolf for ages. So I mean, I understand it, but then again, there's a reason for these animals to be there in their environment. They need to be there, really.
So are you a biologist?
No,
what did you study?
I was a history major.
Okay.
So I know my research.
Right.
That's what history majors do.
Right.
So, but after that, animals are really my thing, and I've really gotten on the bandwagon with trying to teach myself about endangerment and what man has done and what we're trying to do. One of the most horrible things that we're trying to do right now is called translocation. And what translocation is it's taking an animal from its natural environment and moving it to another one and hoping for the best. Mm-hmm. And this is a crazy idea. It has negatives and positives. The Australians are doing this like nuts because koalas are living too close to cities. We find them on roads, etc. But also, they have also done positive things. For instance, the tiger quail that I mentioned earlier, which is critically endangered. They are actually, Australian scientists are actually going out into the bush, they're capturing these, and they're bringing them all to an island where they're completely and totally away from the poisonous cane toad, which is killing them off. And, you know, it's terrible. But that's going to work. That's actually going to work. They're going to isolate them on an island, and they'll have their own population there.
So that's good or bad? Like
that's a good translation.
That's an
example of a good translation.
Because they're getting away from that nasty old toad.
That's getting right, exactly.
Did you write about the nasty old toad in any
I
of your
hate
books
that
yet?
nasty old toad, and no, I haven't. I don't think I want to put him in the spotlight. The Australians don't like him either.
It's a much darker book.
Yeah.
But then what would happen if that toad became extinct? Would that be bad too?
On the Australian continent, it wouldn't be because it doesn't belong there in the first place. But I'm sure it lives in other places. You know what I'm saying? We brought the toad there. It didn't belong there. It flourished because it had no natural enemies.
Okay.
And now it's poisoning other animals. So it's
very fascinating cause and effect. Everything that you're studying.
Yeah. All has a domino effect. It's fascinating. Yeah.
What else? What other questions did you have?
This brings me back to what I was going to ask you about is another idea that runs throughout the book is that whether or not we know it, we're sort of all one, as people, as animals, even with the planet.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Right. Actually, that's the passion. The passion is to make kids and people, if I have to, understand that we all have an effect on one another. Obviously, you could take this to the nth degree and talk about different cultures, different peoples. We're all here together. And if we destroy the environment, we're all going to be affected by it in some way or another. I mean, obviously, it's climate change that's a problem for animals. It's not just a change for animals, it's people. The same thing with habitat destruction, which is the #1 reason why animals become extinct.
Now we have less than 2 minutes. What do you wish that we knew about?
I think what I did next was I wrote what's called a child's environmental fable, and I really wanted to focus on the environment. So I did write a new story, and it's coming out at the end of the month. It's going to be called, or it is called, One Hot Mess.
Oh, okay.
And One Hot Mess takes place in the outback of Australia, and it's people who have thrown garbage into the outback. And we have a troop of kangaroos who are desperate to figure out how they're going to get rid of that particular.
Oh, well, I can't wait.
Right, so it's going to be very cool.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm so glad you drove all that way.
It's my pleasure. I really appreciate it.
And thank you for driving all the way.
My
Because
pleasure.
it's still like, what, an hour for you,
Yeah,
right?
it's nothing in comparison to
Yeah,
your drive.
Nice to meet you,
You as
John.
well.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us, and I will see you next week on the Lisa Saunders Show.